Chapter 1: The Quiet Glow of New York. The city of New York hums with a rhythm of its own, a melody that shifts as day melts into night. The buzz of conversations fades, replaced by the gentle swish of taxis cruising empty streets and the distant murmur of waves brushing against the harbor. Above, the skyscrapers stand as silent sentinels, their windows blinking like stars against the velvet sky.
Breathe in the night and feel its serenity. Somewhere in the heart of the city, in a quiet apartment perched above a small cafe, Theo sits by the window. His fingertips glow faintly, a soft gold that flickers like a candle's flame. By day, Theo blends in, a kind smile, a calm presence, an architect who loves creating spaces where people feel at peace. But as night descends, he becomes Luminaire, a guardian not of battles but of comfort. Theo's powers are quiet, like him. They don't scream or flash, but hum gently, a light that can mend and soothe. He discovered his gift as a child when he held a flickering firefly in his hand, only to watch it shine brighter than ever. Now, he carries that same gentle glow wherever he goes. Tonight is like any other. Theo dons his favorite dark coat, its fabric catching the faintest shimmer of his light, and steps out onto the fire escape. The metal creaks softly beneath his feet. Above, the sky is a deep, endless indigo. Below, the streets wind like glowing veins through the city, each light a tiny beacon in the dark. He takes a deep breath, feeling the city's energy, always alive, always moving, yet tonight it feels restless. A subtle tension hums beneath the surface, as though the city itself is holding its breath. Theo lifts a hand, and with a thought, his body begins to rise. Gently, effortlessly, he drifts above the rooftops, a golden speck against the vastness of the night. The cool air whispers around him, carrying the faint scent of rain from somewhere far away. His first stop is the Brooklyn Bridge. A street lamp flickers there, casting uneven light on the path below. Theo hovers near it, his glowing fingers brushing the cold metal. The light steadies, its warm glow pooling on the pavement like liquid gold. A jogger passes beneath, her face relaxing as she continues on her way. One light at a time, Theo murmurs to himself, a mantra he's carried for years. He moves on, weaving through the quiet city. In the East Village, he spots a group of musicians playing a late-night set on the corner. Their melodies are rich, but the guitarist's strings are out of tune. Theo pauses, his light stretching toward the instrument, gently tuning the notes. The music softens, smooths, and the players exchange smiles, unaware of the unseen hand that helped them. In moments like these, Theo feels most alive, not in grand gestures, but in these small, quiet acts of care. He doesn't need thanks. The peace he spreads is enough. As he drifts over Central Park, the world feels still. The trees below sway gently, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind. Theo pauses, hovering above the treetops. He closes his eyes and lets his light expand, a soft pulse radiating outward. The city below responds in kind. Lights twinkle in windows, and the hum of restless energy eases ever so slightly. Theo smiles. "Sleep well, New York," he whispers. Chapter 2: A Night in the Life of Luminaire. The city hums below, its energy softer now, quieter. Theo floats high above, his glowing figure a warm ember against the deep blue sky. His gaze sweeps the streets, the avenues, the hidden corners where stories unfold, where lives intersect in quiet, unseen ways. He descends gently, landing on a rooftop in Soho. The building is old, its brick walls weathered and strong. Through an open window below, faint music drifts, a jazz record spinning lazily, its notes curling into the night air. Inside, an elderly man sits at an easel, staring at a blank canvas. His hands rest in his lap, fingers stained with dried paint. The years have etched stories into his face, but tonight, those stories seem heavy. Theo steps closer, his feet making no sound. He extends a hand, and a thread of golden light unfurls, weaving through the window and settling near the man. It doesn't touch him, but lingers close, warm and inviting. The man stirs. His gaze lifts to the canvas, then to the paints scattered on the table. Slowly, he reaches for a brush. His strokes are hesitant at first, but soon they grow confident. Colors bloom on the canvas, soft blues, gentle whites, and golden yellows, forming a luminous sunrise over the city. The man's lips curve into a faint smile, and Theo watches silently from the shadows. One small spark, Theo thinks to himself, is all it takes to reignite a flame. Theo moves on, the night cradling him in its quiet embrace. He finds himself drawn to a small diner, its neon sign flickering above the door. Inside, a waitress leans against the counter, her apron tied loosely, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. She wipes down the counter in slow, deliberate circles, the rhythm almost hypnotic. Theo steps inside, his presence unnoticed but felt. The faint glow of his light softens the harsh glare of the fluorescent bulbs, turning the room into a haven of golden warmth. The jukebox hums to life, playing a soft, soothing tune, a melody that seems to wrap around the waitress like a comforting hug. She pauses, her hand stilling on the counter. Her gaze drifts to the window, where Theo's light catches the reflection of her tired face. For a moment, she straightens, her expression softening. She doesn't know why, but she feels lighter, as though a weight she didn't realize she was carrying has been lifted. Theo smiles and steps back out into the night. In another part of the city, a taxi driver navigates the quiet streets. His hands grip the wheel tightly, his thoughts heavy with worries he can't shake. He doesn't notice the golden glow that seeps into the cab, settling on the dashboard like a tiny, flickering flame. The radio, which had been stuck on static, suddenly clears. A gentle melody fills the cab, a song the driver recognizes from his childhood, one his mother used to hum. His grip on the wheel loosens. For the first time in hours, he exhales deeply, a sense of calm washing over him. Theo watches from a nearby alley, his light dimming as the driver's energy steadies. Even the smallest moment of peace, Theo thinks, can change the course of a night. As the hours slip by, Theo continues his journey. He mends a broken lamp post near a playground, its soft glow spilling over an empty swing set. He pauses by a hospital, sending a warm pulse of light through the windows, easing the restless sleep of patients and nurses alike. Each act is small, almost imperceptible, but together they weave a tapestry of calm over the city. Finally, Theo finds himself on a rooftop near the East River. The water below ripples gently, reflecting the city lights in a dance of gold and silver. He sits on the edge, his legs dangling, his light dimming to a soft ember. The city feels quieter now, its restless energy soothed. He closes his eyes, his breathing steady, his thoughts drifting. This is why he does what he does, not for recognition or glory, but for moments like these, when the city sleeps peacefully, wrapped in the gentle glow of his light. Chapter 3. The Hidden Corner of Central Park. The heart of Central Park at night is a world of its own. The city's noise fades into a gentle hush, replaced by the rustle of leaves, the chirp of crickets, and the soft murmur of the wind weaving through the trees. Theo glides low over the park, his light a faint golden shimmer against the darkened canopy. Tonight, the air feels different, as if something ancient and unseen is stirring. Theo pauses mid-flight, hovering above a path where the streetlights end, leaving the way ahead veiled in shadow. Yet, in the distance, something beckons. A faint glow, barely visible, pulsing softly like the rhythm of a heartbeat. Drawn by this mysterious light, Theo descends, his boots landing soundlessly on the soft earth. The trees around him seem older here, their gnarled branches twisting toward the sky as if whispering secrets to the stars. The glow ahead grows brighter, leading him off the path and into the park's hidden depths. After several minutes of weaving through dense foliage, Theo steps into a clearing. He halts, his breath catching in quiet awe. Before him lies a garden unlike anything he's ever seen. Moonlight spills over the space, illuminating a lush, overgrown sanctuary. Flowers in every shade of white and silver bloom wildly, their petals catching the light and shimmering like frost. At the garden's center stands a single lantern, its glass panels etched with intricate designs that shift and dance like living constellations. The light within is warm, steady, and impossibly pure. Sitting beside the lantern is a woman. She is small and frail, wrapped in a shawl that seems to glimmer faintly, as though woven with threads of moonlight. Her silver hair cascades over her shoulders, and her eyes, sharp and knowing, meet Theo's with a quiet smile. "You've found it," she says, her voice soft but resonant, as if it carries the weight of centuries. Theo steps closer, his light instinctively dimming in deference to the lantern's glow. "I didn't know I was looking for anything," he replies, his voice a murmur. The woman gestures for him to sit, and he lowers himself onto the soft grass. The lantern's glow casts gentle shadows over their faces, its warmth wrapping around them like a blanket. "I am Eleanor," she says, "the keeper of this light." She nods toward the lantern. "It has burned here for longer than this city has stood, protecting the dreams of all who dwell within its reach." Theo tilts his head, curiosity sparking in his eyes. "Protecting their dreams?" Eleanor smiles. "Dreams are fragile things, Theo. They are the quiet hopes, the whispered wishes, the gentle truths we often hide, even from ourselves. This light keeps them safe, nourishes them, so they can grow strong enough to become real." Theo listens, the world around them fading as her words sink in. He looks at the lantern, its glow steady and unwavering. "It feels alive," he says softly. "It is," Eleanor replies, "and it is tired. I am tired." Her gaze turns to Theo, her expression kind but searching. "I've been waiting for someone like you." The air seems to still, the garden holding its breath. "Me?" Theo asks, his light flickering uncertainly. "Why me?" Eleanor reaches out, her hand hovering just above his own. "You carry light, Theo, not for power but for healing. Your light is gentle, born from love and care. It is rare, it is needed." For a long moment, Theo is silent, the weight of her words settling over him. He looks at the lantern, then back at Eleanor. "What would you have me do?" Eleanor's smile deepens, lines of warmth and wisdom etched into her face. "Learn," she says simply. "Let the light teach you. Let it show you how to reach not just the city, but the hearts within it." For the next few hours, Theo stays in the garden, listening as Eleanor shares her knowledge. She teaches him to feel the subtle rhythms of the light, to sense the unspoken needs of those it touches. They meditate together under the stars, the lantern's glow intertwining with Theo's, creating patterns that ripple like waves on a still pond. Eleanor shows him how to expand his light, how to make it as soft as a whisper or as steady as a heartbeat. She speaks of balance, of the importance of not just giving but also resting, letting the light replenish itself. And as the hours pass, Theo feels his connection to the light deepening, becoming a part of him in ways he never imagined. As dawn begins to creep over the horizon, painting the sky with soft hues of pink and gold, Eleanor rises. She looks at Theo, her expression serene. "The lantern is yours now," she says. "It will follow you, its light blending with your own. Together, you can bring peace to this city, to the dreams that dwell within it." Theo stands, his heart full but calm. The lantern's glow shifts, moving toward him, its light wrapping around him like an embrace. He feels its warmth, its quiet strength, and knows it will guide him as he continues his journey. Eleanor steps back, her form becoming faint, like a mist dissolving in the morning sun. "You'll do well, Theo," her voice whispers, carried on the wind. "Trust the light." And then she is gone, leaving Theo alone in the garden, the lantern now a part of him, its glow pulsing gently with his own. Chapter 4. Theo's Gift to the City. The morning light filters through the skyline as Theo steps out of the hidden garden, the lantern's glow now a soft ember within him. He feels its warmth deep in his chest, pulsing in time with his own heartbeat. The city stirs awake around him, but Theo can sense the tension beneath its surface. A subtle restlessness that hums like a low, discordant note. He knows what he must do. As night falls, Theo stands atop the highest building in the city, gazing out over the endless sea of lights. From this height, New York looks peaceful, its energy softened by the distance. But Theo knows the truth. Behind those glowing windows are sleepless nights, anxious thoughts, and heavy hearts. The city hums with a silent need, and tonight he will answer. Theo closes his eyes, his breath steady and deliberate. He places a hand over his heart, feeling the lantern's light awaken within him. It spreads slowly, filling him with a calm, radiant warmth. He lifts his arms and the light begins to expand, unfurling like golden ribbons into the sky. The glow rises higher, forming a dome of soft, golden light over the city. It's not harsh or blinding, but gentle, like the first rays of dawn. It flows through the air, winding its way into the smallest crevices, into apartments, alleyways, and subway cars. It seeps through walls and windows, touching everyone it meets with a sense of quiet peace. In a small studio apartment in the Bronx, a young artist sits surrounded by unfinished sketches. She's been staring at a blank page for hours, her frustration mounting. But as the golden light brushes her skin, she feels a sudden wave of calm. Her breathing slows, and her hand moves almost instinctively, sketching smooth, confident lines. A soft smile tugs at her lips. Across the city, a cab driver leans against his steering wheel at a red light. His shoulders are tense, his mind racing with thoughts of bills and repairs. The golden glow filters through the windshield, wrapping around him like a warm blanket. He exhales deeply, his body relaxing for the first time in days. He leans back in his seat, his grip on the wheel loosening. In a quiet hospital room, a nurse sits by a sleeping patient, her head heavy with exhaustion. The light reaches her gently, easing the ache in her back and the weight in her heart. She straightens, a new energy filling her. She looks at her patient, her smile soft and genuine, and feels the quiet strength to carry on. The light doesn't discriminate. It touches everyone. Parents tucking their children into bed, a couple reconciling after a long argument, a lone musician strumming his guitar on a fire escape. It moves like a lullaby, soothing the restless and comforting the weary. Theo hovers above it all, his light spreading farther and farther, until the entire city is bathed in its glow. He can feel the shift below, the way the city's energy softens, the way hearts lighten and breaths deepen. The hum of tension that had plagued the city is gone, replaced by a profound stillness. He smiles softly, his heart full. As the hours pass, the city begins to settle. Lights in windows flicker out one by one, and the streets grow quieter. Theo allows his glow to dim, his light retreating back into him, content that his work for the night is done. He lands on a rooftop near the Hudson River, the water below reflecting the faint remnants of his golden glow. He sits on the edge, his legs dangling, his gaze fixed on the peaceful city. The lantern's warmth is still with him, a quiet, steady presence that reminds him he is never truly alone. Theo closes his eyes, his breathing slow and even. For the first time, he feels the city not as a cacophony of noise and chaos, but as a single harmonious melody. A lullaby sung by millions of voices, each one touched by his light. As the first rays of dawn creep over the horizon, Theo allows himself to rest. His light dims to a faint ember, blending with the soft colors of the morning sky. The city sleeps, cradled in the warmth of his glow, and Theo drifts into a peaceful slumber, knowing that when the city wakes, it will do so with hearts a little lighter and dreams a little brighter. Chapter 5. The Whispering Shadows. The night began like any other. Theo hovered above the city, his golden glow weaving through the streets like a soft melody. From this height, the city seemed serene, its pulse steady. But as he drifted toward the lower east side, a strange sensation washed over him. The light within his chest flickered faintly, as though sensing something amiss. Theo paused mid-flight, his brow furrowing. Below him, the streets looked the same. Glimmering windows, the hum of a passing taxi, the rustle of leaves in the cool night breeze. Yet something felt different. The city's energy, usually a steady rhythm, was uneven, dissonant. He descended carefully, landing on a narrow street lined with old brownstones. Here, the streetlights seemed dimmer, their glow struggling against the darkness. Theo extended his hand, letting his light spread outward. It illuminated the cobblestones, the quiet stoops, and the faintly swaying trees. But the shadows seemed to linger longer than they should, clinging to the edges of his light. "Strange," Theo murmured, his voice barely a whisper. He moved cautiously down the street, his light casting a warm path ahead. As he passed a small cafe with its chairs stacked neatly inside, he felt it again, that subtle, gnawing sensation in his chest. His light faltered, dimming for just a moment before returning to its steady glow. Theo stopped and closed his eyes, focusing on the sensation. It wasn't fear or pain. It was something deeper, an unease that felt almost alive. He let his senses expand, his light reaching farther into the surrounding darkness. And then he heard it. A whisper, faint, fragmented, and fleeting, like a breeze carrying words too soft to catch. Theo's eyes snapped open, and he turned toward the source, a narrow alley shrouded in shadow. The whispers faded as quickly as they had come, leaving only silence in their wake. Theo approached the alley cautiously, his light stretched ahead of him, brushing against the darkness like a gentle tide. But instead of retreating, the shadows seemed to push back, resisting his glow. They twisted and coiled, unnatural in their movement, as if alive. He hesitated, his heart quickening. This was unlike anything he'd encountered before. His light was meant to soothe, to mend, to guide. But now it felt as though it was being swallowed, its warmth muted by an invisible force. Summoning his courage, Theo stepped deeper into the alley. The whispers returned, louder this time, their fragmented words just beyond understanding. They swirled around him, disjointed and overlapping, like echoes of forgotten voices. "What are you?" Theo whispered, his voice steady despite the unease creeping up his spine. The shadows responded, not with words, but with a shift, a ripple in the air that sent a shiver through him. The darkness deepened, and for a moment Theo felt entirely cut off. His light dimmed to a faint ember. He closed his eyes, grounding himself. "Breathe," he reminded himself. "The light is always within you." With a deep inhale, he let the lantern's warmth rise from his chest, its glow pushing outward with renewed strength. The golden light surged, flooding the alley and driving back the shadows. For a brief moment, he saw them clearly. Shapes without form, twisting and writhing like smoke, their edges flickering as if struggling to stay intact. And then, just as suddenly, they were gone. The alley was silent again, its shadows once more still and mundane. Theo stood in the center, his light casting a steady glow. The unease lingered, but the immediate threat had passed. He looked around, his sharp eyes searching for any sign of what he had just encountered. In the far corner of the alley, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. A faint mark etched into the brick wall. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but its shape was distinct. A circle with jagged lines radiating outward, like a sun fractured into shards. Theo reached out, his fingers brushing the symbol. As he touched it, a faint pulse of energy rippled through him, a sensation both foreign and familiar. He withdrew his hand, his mind racing. "This isn't natural," Theo murmured to himself. "This isn't random." He straightened, his light dimming slightly as he gathered his thoughts. Whatever he had encountered, it wasn't just an anomaly. It was deliberate, purposeful, and it wasn't finished. The city's energy still felt off, the rhythm still uneven. Theo knew this was just the beginning. The shadows weren't merely lingering, they were growing, spreading, and whatever force was behind them was unlike anything he'd faced before. He stepped out of the alley, his gaze sweeping the city. The lantern's light within him pulsed faintly, as if urging him forward. Theo tightened his coat, his resolve hardening. "All right," he said softly to himself, his voice steady. "Let's find out what you are." Chapter 6. The Forgotten Dreams. The city hummed with its usual nighttime rhythm, but Theo could feel something beneath the surface, like a song played in a key just slightly out of tune. The whispers in the alley had lingered in his mind, and the faint symbol etched into the wall haunted his thoughts. It wasn't just the shadows that unnerved him. It was the feeling that they carried something intangible, but deeply unsettling. Dreams. Theo didn't know why the word resonated with him as he wandered the city streets that night. The whispers, the resistance of the shadows to his light. It felt as though they weren't just clinging to the darkness, but to something deeper, something hidden. As Theo drifted above a quiet neighborhood near Harlem, his senses prickled. He slowed, hovering over the narrow streets. Here, the energy felt different, not restless like the usual nighttime hum of the city, but muted. Quiet in a way that felt wrong. He scanned the buildings below, his light stretching toward the windows. One by one, they revealed the same unsettling sight. People asleep in their beds, their breathing steady, but their expressions twisted in unease. Faces clenched in concentration, hands twitching, as if chasing something they couldn't quite grasp. Theo descended to street level, landing in front of an old brownstone. The air felt heavy, almost thick, as though it resisted his presence. His light flared softly, pushing back the sensation, but it didn't banish it entirely. He stepped closer to the building, drawn by an inexplicable pull. Inside, the scene was eerie and surreal. A family lay asleep in the modest living room, the parents on the worn couch and their 2 children curled up in makeshift beds on the floor. But their expressions weren't peaceful. Their brows were furrowed, their lips pressed tightly together. One of the children whimpered softly, turning in her sleep, her hands clutching at the blanket as though trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. Theo knelt beside her, his light dimming to a faint, warm glow. He extended a hand, letting the golden warmth flow gently toward her. As the light touched her, she stilled, her breathing evening out. Her expression softened, her small hands relaxing. But Theo felt something strange. It wasn't like the usual ease his light brought. Instead, it was as if her mind resisted, as though her dreams were out of reach, locked behind a door she couldn't open. He stood, his gaze sweeping over the family. The same heaviness surrounded them all, a strange, intangible weight. Theo focused, closing his eyes and letting his senses expand. He felt the threads of their dreams, thin, fragile, and frayed, like strings that had been stretched too far. They were broken in places, disconnected from the deeper well of imagination and rest that dreams usually flowed from. This wasn't natural. Something, or someone, was interfering. Theo left the brownstone, his light glowing brighter as he stepped back onto the street. He could feel it more clearly now, like a web stretching across this part of the city. The threads weren't visible, but their pull was undeniable. They led him deeper into Harlem, where the air grew heavier and the silence more profound. He followed the unseen trail to a small park tucked between apartment buildings. Here, the web of broken dreams felt strongest. The playground was deserted, its swings swaying faintly in the breeze, their chains creaking softly. In the center of the park stood an old fountain, its stone surface cracked and worn with age. Water no longer flowed from its spout, leaving the basin dry and filled with scattered leaves. And there, on the rim of the fountain, sat a figure. She was small, hunched over, her face obscured by the hood of a tattered cloak. Her hands rested on her lap, their thin, pale fingers clutching a strange object. It was a sphere, dark and smooth, with faint lines of silver running through it like veins. The sphere pulsed faintly, emitting a soft, almost imperceptible hum. Theo approached cautiously, his light dimmed but steady. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The figure didn't look up. Instead, she turned the sphere slowly in her hands, her fingers tracing the silver lines. "You don't belong here," she said softly, her voice dry and brittle, like leaves crushed underfoot. "I could say the same about you," Theo replied, stepping closer. The lantern's warmth within him flared slightly, reacting to the sphere's strange energy. "What are you doing to them?" The figure let out a soft, mirthless laugh. "Doing? I'm not doing anything. I'm taking back what was already lost." Her words sent a chill through Theo. "Lost?" he repeated. "What do you mean?" She finally looked up, and Theo saw her face. Her eyes were hollow, their once bright spark dulled. Lines of exhaustion and despair marked her features, and yet there was something in her gaze, something sharp, almost defiant. "They've forgotten how to dream," she said simply. "I'm just collecting what they left behind." Theo's light flared, pushing against the heavy energy surrounding the park. "Dreams aren't something you can take. They belong to the people who create them." The woman shook her head slowly. "Not anymore. They've let them wither, ignored them, abandoned them. I'm giving them a home, a place where they'll be safe." Her grip on the sphere tightened, and Theo felt the pulse of its energy grow stronger. The shadows around the fountain deepened, stretching toward him like tendrils. He stepped back, his light brightening in response. "This isn't the way," he said firmly. "Dreams aren't meant to be locked away. They're meant to grow, to inspire." The woman's gaze hardened. "And what happens when they don't? What happens when people forget? They don't deserve them." Theo's heart ached at her words. He could feel her pain, her disillusionment, but he couldn't let it consume the city. "Let me help you," he said gently. "This doesn't have to end in darkness." For a moment the woman hesitated, her grip on the sphere loosening, but the shadows around her surged, as if resisting her doubt. The sphere pulsed again, and the web of broken dreams tightened around the park, its energy pressing against Theo like a physical weight. Theo closed his eyes, grounding himself in the lantern's light. He let it flow through him, steady and calm, pushing back against the darkness. The golden glow spread outward, touching the shadows and unraveling the web thread by thread. The woman gasped, her hands trembling as the sphere's glow began to dim. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice filled with both fear and awe. "Setting them free," Theo said softly. As his light expanded, the heavy energy lifted. The shadows retreated, and the web dissolved into the night. The sphere in the woman's hands cracked, its dark surface splintering as the silver veins faded. She let it fall, watching as it shattered against the stone fountain. The park grew still, the silence replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves and the soft chirp of crickets. The woman looked up at Theo, her hollow eyes glistening with tears. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Theo stepped closer, his light wrapping around her like a warm embrace. "Now, you let go," he said, "and you let the dreams find their way back." Chapter 7. The Keeper of Forgotten Dreams. As the last fragments of the sphere faded into nothingness, Theo and the woman stood in silence. The golden glow of his light surrounded her like a protective cocoon, its warmth softening the sharp edges of her despair. She looked at him, her expression weary, as though the weight of years had finally settled upon her shoulders. Theo knelt beside her, his light dimming slightly to match the quiet stillness of the moment. "Who are you?" he asked gently. The woman hesitated, her hollow gaze drifting to the broken shards at her feet. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "My name is Lisbeth," she said, the words heavy with emotion. "I was a dreamer once." Lisbeth's early life. Lisbeth's story unfolded slowly, her words like pieces of a puzzle being placed one by one. She had grown up in a small, quiet town far from the bustling chaos of New York. As a child, she had been a dreamer in every sense of the word, her imagination boundless, her nights filled with vivid, fantastical worlds. "I used to tell my dreams to anyone who would listen," Lisbeth said, a faint, bittersweet smile tugging at her lips. "My parents, my teachers, even strangers on the street. I believed dreams could change the world." But as she grew older, the world began to press against her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Practicality replaced wonder, and her bright, hopeful imagination was dimmed by the weight of responsibility. She moved to the city, chasing a career and a life that left little room for the worlds she once created. "They called it growing up," she said, her voice tinged with bitterness. "I called it forgetting." The turning point. For years, Lisbeth lived what she called a hollow life. She worked tirelessly, her days blending into one another, her nights empty of the dreams that had once been her solace. Until one day, she stumbled upon an antique shop tucked away in an unassuming alley. "It was there that I found the sphere," she said, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the broken shards on the ground. "I didn't know what it was at first. It felt alive, like it was calling to me." The shopkeeper had told her it was a relic, an artifact said to hold the energy of forgotten dreams. Lisbeth, desperate to recapture the wonder she had lost, bought it without hesitation. "At first, it felt like a blessing," she continued. "I could feel the dreams I'd forgotten coming back to me. They were faint, like whispers, but they were there." But the sphere was more than a simple artifact. It didn't just pull forgotten dreams from her, it began to draw them from others, taking the fragile threads of imagination and binding them within itself. Lisbeth hadn't understood the consequences at first. She had only felt the joy of dreaming again. "By the time I realized what was happening," she said, her voice breaking, "it was too late. The dreams weren't just forgotten, they were being stolen." Lisbeth's descent. As the sphere grew stronger, so did its hold on Lisbeth. She became its keeper, its conduit, unable to let it go but haunted by what it was doing. She withdrew from the world, retreating to the quiet corners of the city, where the sphere's influence spread unseen. "I told myself I was protecting them," she said softly, "that the dreams were better off with me than being lost forever. But the truth is, I was afraid of losing them again, afraid of facing a world without them." Her voice trembled, and tears streaked her pale cheeks. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I couldn't let them go." Theo's response. Theo listened in silence, his light glowing softly between them. He could feel the depth of her pain, the years of loneliness and regret that had shaped her actions. And yet, he also saw the spark of hope within her, a faint, flickering ember that hadn't been extinguished. "You've carried this burden for so long," Theo said gently. "But dreams aren't meant to be held on to like this. They're meant to be shared, to inspire. Keeping them locked away doesn't protect them. It diminishes them." Lisbeth's gaze dropped to the ground, her hands clenching into fists. "I don't know how to let go," she admitted, her voice barely audible. Theo reached out, his hand hovering above hers. "You don't have to do it alone," he said. "The light isn't just mine. It's yours too. It's in all of us. You've felt it before. Let it guide you." The first step toward healing. For a long moment, Lisbeth was silent. Then, slowly, she nodded. Theo's light expanded, wrapping around her like a warm embrace. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth seep into her, dissolving the darkness that had clung to her heart for so long. As the light enveloped her, the park seemed to shift. The air grew lighter, the shadows receding entirely. The broken shards of the sphere faded into dust, carried away by a gentle breeze. And for the first time in years, Lisbeth felt free. A new beginning. When the light faded, Lisbeth opened her eyes, her expression softer, her gaze clearer. She looked at Theo, a faint smile breaking through the weariness. "Thank you," she said simply. Theo nodded, his own light dimming slightly as he prepared to leave. "Your dreams are still yours," he said. "But now they're free to grow again. Share them. Let them inspire others the way they once inspired you." Lisbeth watched as he rose into the sky, his golden glow blending with the faint light of the stars. She stayed in the park for a long time, the warmth of his light still lingering in her chest. And as the first rays of dawn touched the horizon, Lisbeth made a silent promise to herself. She would dream again, and this time she wouldn't dream alone. Chapter 8. The Dreamweaver's Path. The city had begun to shift. Theo could feel it in the air as he glided above the rooftops, his golden glow faint against the deep indigo sky. Since his encounter with Lisbeth and the destruction of the sphere, the whispers in the shadows had quieted, and the heaviness in the city's energy had lessened. Yet, Theo knew his work was far from over. Dreams are delicate things, fragile as spider silk, and Lisbeth's actions had left the city's dreamscape fractured. The threads that connected people to their imagination, their hope, and their rest had been stretched thin, some torn completely. Theo could feel those missing pieces, like gaps in a once complete melody. It was time to begin the restoration. The first threads. Theo started in a quiet neighborhood in Queens. Here, the energy felt lighter, the web of dreams less damaged. He landed on the roof of a small apartment building, his light casting a gentle glow over the streets below. Closing his eyes, he reached out with his senses, letting the lantern's warmth guide him. It didn't take long to find the first thread. It pulsed faintly, a shimmering strand of light barely visible against the night. Theo extended a hand, his own light merging with the thread. He followed it down into the building, through the walls, and into a small, cluttered apartment. Inside, a teenage boy sat at a desk, his head resting on a pile of textbooks. His pencil was still in his hand, its tip hovering above a half-finished math problem. He was asleep, his breathing steady, but Theo could see the faint shimmer of his dream struggling to take form. The thread of light connecting the boy to his imagination was frayed, its once bright glow dim and uneven. Theo knelt beside him, his light reaching out gently. He didn't force it, but let it weave itself into the boy's thread, strengthening it, mending the broken strands. As the connection grew brighter, the boy stirred slightly, a soft smile crossing his face. His dream, once lost in the haze of fatigue and worry, began to bloom. In the dream, the boy stood on a stage, his voice strong and confident as he delivered a speech to an applauding crowd. The vision wasn't grand or fantastical. It was simple, rooted in a quiet hope for the future. But it was enough. The thread glowed steadily now, its connection restored. The Call of Broken Dreams. As Theo left the boy's apartment, the lantern's warmth pulsed within him, guiding him toward the next broken thread. He followed its pull through the city, moving from neighborhood to neighborhood, mending the delicate connections one by one. Each dream he touched was different, unique in its quiet beauty. In a dimly lit diner in Brooklyn, a cook dozed off in the kitchen, his thread barely flickering. Theo strengthened it, and the man's dream unfolded, a memory of his grandmother teaching him to bake, her laughter filling the room. In a bustling Manhattan hospital, a nurse on her break drifted into a restless sleep. Theo soothed her thread, and her dream transformed into a peaceful walk along the beach, the sound of waves washing away her exhaustion. With each thread he repaired, Theo felt the city's energy shift. The rhythm grew steadier, the melody more harmonious. But for every thread he mended, he felt the weight of the larger task ahead. The fractures were widespread, and some threads were harder to find, buried deep beneath layers of neglect and despair. An unexpected encounter. One night, as Theo followed the faint glow of a particularly elusive thread, he found himself on the rooftop of a building in the East Village. The thread led him to a young woman sitting on the edge, her legs dangling over the side. She wasn't asleep, but her thread was frayed and dim, as though her connection to her dreams had been stretched too thin to hold. Theo approached cautiously, his light dimmed to a soft glow. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. The woman turned, her expression guarded. "I'm fine," she said quickly, though the weight in her voice suggested otherwise. She glanced at him, her eyes narrowing slightly at the faint shimmer of his light. "Who are you?" "I'm someone who fixes things," Theo said, offering a faint smile. "I noticed something about you. Your dreams, they seem far away." The woman's gaze softened slightly, though she remained wary. "I don't dream anymore," she admitted after a long pause. "Not like I used to. It's just too hard." Theo sat beside her, his light casting a gentle warmth over the rooftop. "Dreams aren't just for the good times," he said softly. "Sometimes they're what carry us through the hardest moments." The woman didn't respond, but she didn't move away either. Theo extended his hand, his light flowing toward her. It wasn't intrusive, it simply lingered, warm and inviting. Slowly, she let her guard down, her posture relaxing as the light wrapped around her. Theo felt her thread, frayed and tangled but not beyond repair. He worked carefully, weaving the strands back together, letting the light flow through her. She closed her eyes, her breathing deepening as the connection grew stronger. The City Awakens. Over the following weeks, Theo continued his work, mending threads and strengthening the dreamscape piece by piece. He began to notice subtle changes in the city. The way people's energy felt lighter, the way their faces seemed more at peace. In a quiet park, a street musician played a melody that carried the warmth of a shared dream, its notes weaving through the crowd like golden threads. On a crowded subway, a young man sketched quietly in his notebook, his hand moving with renewed confidence as he imagined a world he'd almost forgotten. The city was healing, its dreamscape coming back to life. And though the work was far from over, Theo felt a quiet sense of hope. As he stood on a rooftop overlooking the skyline, Theo let his light dim slightly, the lantern's warmth steady within him. The city stretched out before him, its rhythm steady and harmonious. For the first time in a long while, the dreamscape felt alive, its threads glowing softly against the darkness. Theo smiled, his heart full. One thread at a time, he murmured to himself, his light flickering gently in the night. Chapter 9. The Luminous Thread. The city's dreamscape wasn't the only realm touched by unusual forces. Far to the west of Manhattan, where the urban sprawl began to fade into quieter suburbs, there lived a man who also carried light. But his was of a different kind. The backstory of Gabriel, the Echo. Gabriel had always been attuned to sound. As a child, he could hear whispers others couldn't, echoes of voices long faded from a room. At first, he thought it was just an overactive imagination, but as he grew older, he realized the truth. Sound, like light, left traces of itself in the world, and Gabriel could hear them. This unique connection deepened after an accident during his teenage years. While exploring an abandoned theater, a heavy beam collapsed, pinning him beneath its weight. He called for help, but his voice echoed back to him in strange, haunting tones. Just as his strength began to falter, the echoes around him swelled, carrying his voice farther than it should have reached. Minutes later, rescuers arrived, following the strange resonance of his cries. From that day forward, Gabriel understood that sound wasn't just something that passed. It was something that lingered, something he could shape and amplify. He began to use his ability to protect and guide, becoming known in whispers as the Echo. Where Theo's light brought calm and restoration, Gabriel's resonance brought clarity and connection. Together, light and sound formed a harmony of purpose, though their paths had never crossed. Until now. A chance meeting. Theo first sensed Gabriel's presence while working to repair a cluster of dreams near the waterfront. The energy was unusually erratic, with threads vibrating wildly, as though something was amplifying the emotions tied to them. Theo followed the disturbance to a stretch of warehouses by the Hudson River, where a faint hum, like the resonance of a tuning fork, lingered in the air. Inside one of the warehouses, Theo found a man standing amid a sea of shattered glass. His stance was steady, his posture calm, but his hands glowed faintly with pulsing waves of energy. The air round him shimmered, vibrating softly as if alive with an invisible symphony. Theo approached carefully, his own light dimming to avoid startling the stranger. "You've been busy," he said, his voice calm but curious. The man turned, his eyes sharp and focused. "And you're the one leaving threads of light everywhere," he replied, his tone even but edged with curiosity. "You've been stirring things up." Theo tilted his head. "I could say the same about you." The dreamscape is trembling, and I think it has something to do with your resonance. Gabriel's expression softened slightly. I've been trying to quiet the echoes. Something's amplifying them. Something unnatural. He extended a hand, and a soft, rippling wave of sound filled the room. It's like the dreams themselves are crying out. A test of strengths. Theo stepped closer, his golden light mingling with the faint shimmer of Gabriel's sound waves. Whatever's causing this, it's affecting both of us. Maybe we can work together. Gabriel studied him for a moment before nodding. All right, let's see what happens. They began to weave their abilities together, searching for the source of the disturbance. Gabriel sent out waves of resonance, his sound peeling back layers of distorted energy, while Theo's light flowed through the gaps, illuminating the hidden threads of the dreamscape. At first, their abilities clashed, light and sound bouncing off each other in chaotic bursts. But slowly, a rhythm emerged. Gabriel's resonance softened, adapting to the gentle flow of Theo's light, while Theo adjusted his glow to match the cadence of Gabriel's waves. Together, they uncovered a tightly wound cluster of broken threads tangled around a single point. The energy here was volatile, trembling with an unnatural force. The source of the disturbance. In the center of the disturbance lay a shard of something dark and crystalline, pulsating faintly with each wave of Gabriel's resonance. Theo knelt beside it, his light dimming as he examined the shard. It felt cold, lifeless, yet it held a strange power that seemed to disrupt the threads around it. "What is it?" Gabriel asked, his voice quieter now, the tension in the air palpable. Theo shook his head. "I don't know, but it's not from here." The shard seemed to react to their presence, its pulse growing stronger, sending out waves of distorted energy that threatened to unravel the threads they had just repaired. Gabriel stepped forward, his hands glowing as he sent a resonant wave toward the shard. The sound vibrated through it, causing the shard to tremble violently. "It's unstable," Gabriel said, his voice tight. "We need to contain it." Theo extended his light, wrapping it around the shard like a protective cocoon. The golden glow steadied its pulse, dimming the chaotic energy. Together they worked in silence, their abilities blending in a delicate balance of harmony and precision. After several tense minutes, the shard's energy finally subsided, its pulse fading into stillness. A new alliance. As the warehouse grew quiet, Theo and Gabriel stepped back, their gazes meeting. For the first time, Theo saw the depth of Gabriel's resolve, the way his abilities carried both power and purpose. "You're good at this," Theo said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Gabriel chuckled softly. "So are you. Seems like we've got more in common than I thought." Theo nodded. "This shard, whatever it is, it's not the last of its kind. I've felt traces of something similar in the dreamscape." Gabriel's expression grew serious. "Then we'll have to find them. Together. The path ahead." As they left the warehouse, the city's skyline stretched before them, its lights shimmering against the night. For the first time, Theo felt a sense of relief. He wasn't alone in this journey anymore. With Gabriel's resonance complementing his light, the dreamscape's restoration felt more possible. But as they prepared for the challenges ahead, both men knew that the shards were only part of the mystery. Something larger was at play, something that would test the harmony they had just begun to build. For now, though, they moved as one, their light and sound blending seamlessly as they set out to heal the city's fractured dreams. Chapter 10. The Symphony of Light. The city was restless. Theo and Gabriel stood atop the tallest building in Manhattan, the city sprawling below them like a vast, pulsing web of lights. But Theo could feel the disturbance. The threads of the dreamscape, though mended in many places, still carried an underlying tension, a vibration that hinted at something unfinished, something waiting. Gabriel's resonance hummed beside him, steady and focused. "It's gathering," he said, his voice low. "All the fragments, all the shards. They're converging somewhere below." Theo nodded, his light flaring softly. He could feel it, too, a deep, pulsing void drawing the fractured pieces of the dreamscape together. The energy was dark and cold, a stark contrast to the warmth of their powers. "Then it's time," Theo said, his voice calm but resolute. "Let's end this." The descent. The pair moved quickly, their abilities weaving together as they descended into the city. The pull of the disturbance grew stronger, guiding them toward an abandoned subway station beneath the heart of Manhattan. The air here was heavy, thick with the hum of distorted energy. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting and coiling like living things. Gabriel sent out a wave of resonance, the sound rippling through the darkness and revealing faint, jagged patterns etched into the walls. "This is it," he said, his tone grim. "The shards have formed something. A nexus." Theo stepped forward, his light illuminating the station. In the center of the platform stood a massive structure, formed entirely of the crystalline shards they had encountered before. The shards pulsed faintly, their energy intertwining in a chaotic rhythm that sent ripples through the dreamscape. "It's feeding on the broken threads," Theo murmured, his chest tightening. He could feel the void pulling at the dreams, unraveling the connections he had worked so hard to restore. The final battle. As Theo and Gabriel approached the structure, it reacted violently. Waves of distorted energy surged outward, shaking the station and sending shards of debris cascading from the ceiling. Gabriel raised his hands, his resonance forming a protective barrier that absorbed the brunt of the force. Theo extended his light, weaving it through the chaotic energy. The glow pushed back the darkness, but the nexus resisted, its pulse growing stronger. The shards began to vibrate, their jagged edges glowing with a cold, harsh light. "It's trying to overwhelm us," Gabriel said through gritted teeth, his resonance faltering under the strain. Theo closed his eyes, centering himself. The lantern's warmth within him pulsed steadily, a reminder of the light's purpose, not to destroy, but to heal. He reached out, letting his light flow through the dreamscape, touching every broken thread and drawing strength from the connections he had repaired. "Together," Theo said, his voice steady. "We need to harmonize." Gabriel nodded, his resonance shifting to match the cadence of Theo's light. Slowly, the two forces began to blend, their energy forming a single, unified wave. The glow of Theo's light intertwined with the hum of Gabriel's resonance, creating a symphony of warmth and clarity that surged toward the nexus. The structure trembled, its jagged edges fracturing under the combined force. The chaotic energy began to unravel, the void shrinking as the harmony of light and sound filled the station. The dreamscape's broken threads glowed brightly, reconnecting in a tapestry of vivid, shimmering light. The restoration. As the nexus shattered, its fragments dissolved into the air, their energy absorbed back into the dreamscape. The oppressive weight that had hung over the city lifted, replaced by a profound stillness. Theo and Gabriel stood in the center of the platform, their powers dimming as the station returned to quiet. "It's done," Gabriel said, his voice soft, almost disbelieving. Theo nodded, his light flickering gently. He could feel the dreamscape now, whole and harmonious, its threads vibrant and strong. The city's energy was steady, its rhythm serene. They left the station together, emerging into the cool night air. Above them, the stars shone brightly, their light reflected in the gentle glow of the city below. The chaos was gone, replaced by a calm that Theo could feel in every breath of the city. The city sleeps. As Theo moved through the quiet streets, he saw the change. In a small apartment, a child slept peacefully, her dreams vivid and bright. In a park, a homeless man stirred slightly, his face softening as a long-forgotten memory played in his mind. Across the city, people rested, their hearts lighter, their dreams undisturbed. Gabriel stopped at a street corner, his resonance fading into silence. "This city's lucky to have you," he said, his tone warm but firm. Theo smiled faintly. "It's not just me. The light isn't mine alone, it's everyone's. I just help remind them." Gabriel chuckled. "Humble to the end." They parted ways, Gabriel's silhouette fading into the night, his purpose now his own. Theo continued on, his light dimming to a soft ember as he settled onto his favorite rooftop overlooking the city. The closing glow. Theo sat quietly, his legs dangling over the edge, his gaze fixed on the sleeping city. The lantern's warmth pulsed steadily within him, its glow blending with the faint light of the stars. He closed his eyes, his breathing slowing, his heart at peace. The city's dreams were safe now, their threads woven into a tapestry of endless possibilities. And as the first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, Theo allowed himself to rest. The city breathed deeply, cradled in the glow of his light. And somewhere, beneath the quiet hum of the waking world, a lullaby lingered in the dreamscape. A song of light, sound, and peace. Epilogue. The light that never fades. The city stirs gently as the sun rises, its golden light blending with the lingering glow of Theo's gift. The streets are still quiet, the early hours holding a rare, tranquil stillness. Theo rests atop his rooftop perch, his light dimmed to a soft ember, his heart steady and full. New York has always been a city of contrasts, noise and quiet, light and shadow, restlessness and peace. But tonight, Theo has tipped the balance, even if only for a while. He knows the restlessness will return. It always does. But so will he. That is the promise of light. It fades, but it never truly disappears. The lantern within Theo pulses faintly, a reminder of the ancient wisdom Eleanor entrusted to him. He places a hand over his chest, feeling its steady rhythm. The light is a part of him now, as inseparable as his own heartbeat. And as the city awakens, Theo smiles, knowing that he, too, will awaken again when the night calls for him. For now, he lets his body relax, his breath slowing, his mind drifting. Above him, the sky transitions into soft hues of pink and blue, a quiet promise of another day. The city and its gentle guardian sleep in harmony.